Hey everyone, it's Jamison Cable of the Land Between the Meadows, Kentucky History Podcast. I just want to say thank you for your support and listening to this episode. For all the updates on our podcast and YouTube channel, youtube.com/Kentucky History Channel, like and follow us on Twitter and Facebook at KY History Pod. If you're enjoying the podcast, give us a good rating and review on Apple Podcasts or the podcast platform that you're listening to. If you're looking for ways to support the podcast, an easy and simple way is to share it on Facebook or any other social media and tell your friends. You can also go to audibletrial.com/KYHistoryPod and get a free book of your choice. And finally, you can visit patreon.com/KYHistoryPod if you want extra content from us. If you're already a patron, thank you for your support. It means so much to us. All the links I've mentioned are in the description of the podcast, so go check them out. Thanks again for listening. I hope you enjoy this episode. And remember, if it's not about Kentucky, it ain't worth a hill of beans.
We're talking about the Constitution today, Kentucky Constitution.
Well, Kentucky becoming a state, like the bare bones of how it happened.
Right.
And
bare bones. We already said they're a bunch of drunks and gamblers.
They kept aggravating Virginia to death. Before we get too much into it, I do want to give some shout outs to some fans that have sent us messages over time.
Is this in French or English?
All English. Yeah, these are all English.
We've got a big French contingent, French connection.
And I do encourage, of course, if you were listening to the episode, you probably heard the beginning part about writing a review on iTunes. That helps out. But Monica, Shamel, Teresa Kernbow, Richard Buckler, Phil McCoy, Donald Harplow, Samantha and Jacob Smith, and Matt Moorhead all have reached out a time here and there. Giving us good reviews.
Cut our wires.
Told us that hey, we've heard enough.
Well, that's great.
Done,
we appreciate that.
We do, and always, of course, encourages us to learn more. We are going to get to Western Kentucky. We are going to get to Western Kentucky and some more history out that way. That was a suggestion from Matt Moorhead. He wants us to get out west, which we'll get there. When I say last time, it's been a few episodes, but we talked about the basics of Kentucky becoming a state and how it bugged Virginia a lot. But it was real. I don't know
if it bugged Virginia. I think they're glad to get rid of us.
I don't know. I want to say it was a bit more of a messy divorce.
Really?
Okay. Kentucky wanted out. Virginia kind of wanted to keep them, and it kind of got a little messy. But anyway, and did you know the foreign influence of Kentucky becoming a state?
Yeah.
All right. Well, good. Then you're prepared.
Yeah.
So we start off again in August of 1785. So that was when another convention, and they had these conventions. I mean, there's, like 7 or 8 total conventions of them coming together.
Free beer.
Having a good time.
Free
talking
whiskey.
about becoming a state. Yeah. So George Muter, who is a big character, we got to remember George Muter. He comes in a lot. He's the chairman of this convention, and this was kind of what they wanted. We're going to Virginia. This is what we want. And these are the 4 reasons we want this. It's impossible for an application to the executive power in cases of public emergency. If something goes crazy in Kentucky, how they going to get anything done? Everybody's in Virginia. They can't do anything. The difficulty for representation for the legislation. To be a legislator, going to Virginia, the journey was way too far to get anything done. The penalties, so there's a law passed. It gets to Kentucky at this time. So we're gonna file charges on so and so for doing blank. Okay, well let's go. We got to go back to West Virginia or to Virginia to get it all done, and that's 3 months later.
Same way with filing deeds, and so forth.
Land was a big issue. Any kind of appeals to the high court, these were all the big things. And what it came down to, if you were rich, it worked out okay for you, of course.
Of course.
You know, typically, you had the money to travel. If you were some poor dude in Kentucky and you got charged with some crime, and say you only had to like pay, you know, a $5 bail or whatever it may be, you're not even going to be able to get to Virginia to pay it.
Right.
So then you're going to be in jail for longer.
When they did set up the early courts, you know, in Kentucky, really Kentucky was just full of a bunch of dumb people. And what really brought the class into Kentucky was the lawsuits, you know, where they would just sue each other. Poor people would sue each other, and people like Henry Clay and Breckinridge, you know, all the top gravy, it's where the money was. In land disputes, they came over into Kentucky, and that's how we got, you know, what good genetics we have here in Kentucky came from Virginia, because
well, I mean,
it sure as hell wasn't any here. Still isn't.
So got meddled down over there.
No, they don't.
But the convention's judge, George Muter, and Harry Enos, the Enos or Inus?
Is it Enos or penis?
Easy.
It's Enos. Excuse me. I'm just trying to see what your notes
Harry
are.
Enos. All right, gotcha.
I'm looking over your shoulder.
Yeah. Which Harry Enos, that can go many different ways. We don't.
Yeah. Was that his first name? Harry, you're making that up.
No.
You're making that. That couldn't be right. What were you doing when you wrote this?
So anyway.
Is this the way you do notes for school? Oh, Lord. Go ahead.
So him, George Muter, and Harry Enos, let's move on. Which I think is his name comes up.
That's what it is.
Were selected to present this invitation or the petition to Virginia to say, hey, we want to become a state. You know, they were going to a hearing, a bill. You know, the bill was an act concerning the erection of the.
Oh my God, you're going to have to omit this. Scratch this whole damn thing out. Let's start over.
Of the District of Kentucky, independent state, and it was passed.
Bunch of damn 2-year-olds here.
In January 1786. So what does that mean? Not literally.
Told you, we already said a bunch of dumb butts over here.
So
we're gonna
put explicit.
Harry Penis to what? To Virginia. Ask them to become a state. Oh yeah, I'm sure.
So they get to Virginia, and
I hadn't heard this history yet. This is all new to me. I'm supposed to know something about it, but go ahead.
So Virginia tells them though that Kentucky, go back, get some more, elect some delegates, and they'll meet on the 4th Monday of September to confirm the district delegates and to become an independent state. All sounds good. But Virginia says, do you really want to become a state? That's kind of what they're saying. Do you really want to become a state?
That's probably Patrick Henry or somebody.
Yeah, and we'll get to those fellas. But anyway, so
I wonder if Kentucky could claim Patrick Henry as one of our own, since he was a Virginian.
Well, I mean,
why not?
Why not? I mean, a lot of them.
Maybe say Patrick Henry came from Kentucky.
You might as well say the first 4 presidents.
Yeah, Washington, all of them. That's right.
There you go.
Heck yeah, Thomas Jefferson, all of them. Yep. There you go.
But they all played a big role of Kentucky. But they have another convention in September of '86, and delegates are chosen. They assemble, but they lacked a quorum. They have quorum, which is. You know what a quorum is?
Yes.
They don't show up. They had people that didn't show up.
Have to have a certain number to vote, make it legal.
But they had a decent reason why they didn't show up.
Indians got them.
Clark was out fighting in Logan, or was out fighting Wabash. Is that correct?
Wabash.
And Logan was out fighting the Shawnee. So these were big players, Benjamin Logan and George Rogers Clark. They were all out doing that, so they couldn't be there. Had a quorum. The men that were present did create a draft, and they sent old John Marshall to Virginia to kind of show them this draft again. But they didn't.
What did Harry do?
I don't know where he was at.
We lost track of him. As soon as he got to Virginia, we never heard of him historically again.
But it wasn't until January that the military people were able to return. And they, of course, voted to separate from Virginia. And this whole process, though, John Marshall here, he's in Virginia. He's pleading the case. They finally don't get enough to show up until later. It kind of becomes, a bit messy. His efforts, Marshall's efforts, of course, are kind of met with resistance, and they're given another deadline. By 1788, you have this, or I think it was 87. You have this meeting, hey, have this meeting here, get 5 delegates again, and then if everything goes smoothly by 1788, we'll help you become a state. And of course, that's really not how it goes. So another convention is held, and of course they have a debate. So all these conventions are debating, what should we have on this? But they're pretty unanimous. We want to be separate from Virginia. And again, they do the same thing. They send a representative. They actually get a representative on Congress, like the U.S. Congress. Mr. John Brown, he becomes the senator.
It's all because of where you come from.
All me?
Mm-hmm.
All
Rock Castle and the Appalachian Mountains.
Oh, yeah.
That was the problem.
Yeah.
If it had been level land, there wouldn't have been any question at all. Been there in a minute.
Yeah, but so they send old John Brown to be the representative of Congress for the District of Kentucky, which, I guess it helps out a little bit, but, it is what it is. So they thought for sure, hey, in 1788, we're going to be admitted, we're going to be good, and so forth. But, they had a voice of Congress at Virginia, representing Virginia, though. Like, John Brown was a Virginian still. He wasn't necessarily from Kentucky, which the U.S. had plans to settle states, across the Appalachian Mountains, obviously.
Kentucky probably wasn't contributing much to the tax kitty.
No.
And they were draining because every time an Indian would jump out of the bushes, they'd ask for another 10,000 or something. Plus
we need
the
some soldiers.
Continental Army, soldiers, kegs of whiskey, beer, guns.
And if you look at
women, they put all that down. Seriously, all that.
Put some more hogs.
So hogs, bring a bunch of hogs over the mountains. Horses.
If you look back, and if you think about all this, the war, the U.S.
breeding stock.
The Revolutionary War is kind of just ending. They're still, they're still old France. They have
still
old
old France.
They're going, Marquis de Lafayette.
Yeah.
I always said Marquis, which is not right. But anyway, the U.S. Congress passed an ordinance for the government of the territory of the U.S. northwest of the Ohio River in June 1787. In this ordinance, they planned to create 3, or at least 3, but no more than 5 states. And they had all these states were supposed to reach to the Mississippi. And which, when the U.S. made these plans, for new states, they had requirements. The new state, they had to they would be formed by the original 13, so they'd have to, I guess, approve it that way. They had to be 60,000 inhabitants, free inhabitants, and they would come in, though, on equal footing once they were established as the original colonies.
They had to have public education.
Which Kentucky
they didn't have.
Lacked on.
And they're one of the ones that voted on.
So with these factors, it was easy for Kentucky to assume, hey, we're going to be a state. Immigration, of course, was booming. People were coming here,
floating down the Ohio, sunbathing,
and just ready to get to the bluegrass,
drinking, partying, party boats.
Yeah.
They were.
Oh, get us some corn, boys. Let's get us some corn. Make
get
some whiskey.
Some corn. Get them sacks of corn.
Yep. But the people of Kentucky were, in a way, kind of trapped. They had the Appalachians on the east, and then they had the Mississippi, and Ohio was their only way of really getting anything out.
And it went south. It didn't go east.
So that was
the problem.
And
you can't paddle upstream with a load of whiskey.
They had needed to export, and New Orleans was a big player.
New Orleans had all the money and the whiskey and the women and everything else they wanted.
A guy named Wilkinson, he went to Louisiana to persuade Spain to
Spain.
trade.
He was going to trick them and make Kentucky a Spanish territory.
Yeah, you see, we're getting there. So anyway, more representations. Kentucky, the Representative Brown that we talked about, he goes to the Congress and stuff, and there's kind of a bargain. Brown writes letters to James Madison, Jefferson, Thomas Jefferson, and he's kind of like it's kind of this politics. It's politics. Hey, you help Kentucky become a state. You help us pass the Constitution, and we're talking about the Constitution of the United States, not just Kentucky, or ratified, if you want to call it that. So I think on June 26, 1788, the federal Constitution is passed with the help of Kentucky delegates.
I wonder how ratify got a name. It's R-A-T, like rat.
Yeah.
If-I. So if you ratify, if you break it down, it's like rats.
Yeah, that is interesting. Yeah. Goes right well with politicians. I
It
guess.
does, doesn't it? A bunch of rats.
So the mighty Mississippi, as you talked about a few minutes earlier, and this I kind of, and maybe you can clarify this. You might know a little bit more. The big plan to make Kentucky Spanish. The Spanish wanted to establish a colony. They call it the New Madrid colony. Is that the place over on Western Kentucky?
Yeah,
is that the like the little little
Missouri too? Yeah,
That was considered the New Madrid colony, and that was going to be established in Spain.
When Daniel Boone left Kentucky and moved to Missouri, he had to get permission from the Spanish to live in Missouri.
Okay. Yeah, and which at this time, I mean, that was all Spanish, and then it becomes French a little bit later, and then eventually American. So the Spanish, though, they are wanting to control the Mississippi, which for obvious reasons, it's a big network. George Rogers Clark raises some soldiers to go kind of fight these people off, or to fight these Spanish posts. Against the governor of Virginia's wishes, and the governor of Virginia wants Harry Enos, to the attorney of Kentucky.
He shows up again,
and he wants him to
expose
charges
himself
against Clark and Logan for doing this, but again he refuses and says like the only governor can do it. But they end up fighting off these Spanish posts. From what I understood, the deal of the New Madrid colony was kind of the end of Spanish. Not the end as in that it's where it ended, but that was the signal that ended. How could I say it? That was the
intent.
That intent. Kind of
to sell Kentucky out.
Was the big thing that ended up having Spanish.
It was a crooked
lose
deal.
Everything.
Yeah, it was under the table, under the blanket, you might say.
Yeah. But this all helped Kentucky big time because Congress wanted the Mississippi, and Kentucky touched the Mississippi in this way, and so that really made a big push for Kentucky to be an independent state. Now, and I keep on thinking of all this, but while this is all happening, the Constitution is being ratified, and at this time, like half throughout 1788, that's when all these states ratify the Constitution, and Kentucky is like, hey, we want to be a state, let us be a state, and the other original 13 are trying to get their heads together. Do you know what state was after Rhode Island and before Kentucky?
Vermont.
Yeah, Vermont. Yeah, they did it. It's interesting because Rhode Island was the last one to ratify it. A year later, Vermont, and the next year is Kentucky. But again,
do you know which state came after Kentucky?
Tennessee.
Yeah.
And then it's Ohio.
I think so.
Yeah. Losers.
No, losers. Oh, heathens is what I call them. If you're from Ohio, you're an Ohedian.
unless you're buying some antiques.
That's right. Then you're all right. You're welcome.
So the Spanish guy.
They come across the river up there in Augusta, in droves.
Oh yeah.
We sell trinkets to the natives.
So Patrick Henry, William Grayson is helping, or has their doubts in the Constitution, which is we can talk about all that later. James Monroe didn't think that the new government could navigate the Mississippi. Now that's insane. Like he just didn't think they could have control of it. Not to say that he didn't want them to. But Diego de Guardicool, is that good?
Yeah.
That's my Spanish is best I can get.
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah. So John Brown.
Diego
tells George Muter.
Just like a Diego salad.
Tells George Muter, Chief Justice of the District of Kentucky.
We'll go back to the Mexican menu again.
That he was assured.
Cold beer.
But anyway, so John Brown is told by Diego Guardicool. I'm not sure about
Good Spanish. Man. I like it.
It's perfect. Has assured him that if Kentucky declares itself as an independent state, separate from the United States, that he has the power to grant them the navigation of the Mississippi. He can give that to him, which is a huge bargain. But Harry Enos and John Brown later are accused of interactions with Spanish and for treason and this and that. But all their reputations are cleared from Isaac Shelby, future governor, Samuel McDowell, random dude, and Christopher Greenup, future governor. So all these guys come to their aid and say, hey, this was not the plan. So
they're all a bunch of good old boys.
Good old boys, all in the political club, which...
That's what Adolph Rupp, used to say when he had some basketball players.
Get in trouble?
Got in trouble, Yeah, they may have knocked off a country store or two, robbed a bank, but they're good old boys. You know, they just
give them a break.
Give them a break. You know, I mean, they's all right. They're just that's what boys do. You know, rob banks and everything else. You know, they're all right.
Yeah. So with all this. With all that, another convention, of course, is held.
Just Kentucky boys.
Just Kentucky boys living it up.
That's right.
They have another convention, 1788. We're getting there. We're marching to 92, 1792.
Okay. Right. I was wondering where we were going.
Yeah. The 28th.
Down to Mississippi.
Yeah, they have another quorum. They have to wait a day or two. Some people just got a little too heavy on the booze on their way to.
Yeah.
On the way
Need
to.
a day or two to sober up.
Samuel McDowell is president. Isaac Shelby is the chairman. All these topics that they talk about are agreed upon unanimously. There was a displeasure, though, that Kentucky hadn't been accepted yet. You know, but no talk of treason or anything. But they were kind of getting their feathers were getting a little rough. During this convention, they actually did draft up a constitution. Would be the first, I guess, that they did. After the fact, like after years down the road, like of course politicians being politicians. They accused each other at times, like saying, "Hey, during this convention, people started saying that we shouldn't join the United States." Like they would say that politically as things, even though that wasn't really true. They just kind of for political stabs, I guess, jabs. We talked about Spanish getting involved, or the British are going to get involved in Kentucky. And John Connolly, he heads to Kentucky. And unbeknownst to people, he is a British agent, and his mission is to gain troops for the old crown.
Oh, yeah.
And he owned land near the Falls of the Ohio, which would become Louisville. And he only a few people even knew about his plan here. Charles Scott, future governor, Thomas Marshall, and George Muter, who is a recurring fellow here. But eventually Conley was arrested, and his plans were discovered. And this is interesting. You know how his plans were discovered?
Mm-mm.
He had them written down in his coat pocket.
Huh. Well, that was clever.
And so whenever Wynn got a hold of him, they arrested him. And here you go. Here's his plan. But anyway.
This is what I'm going to do.
The British Army has sent me here to get troops.
Yeah.
But at one point, a letter was written and published in the paper, and it was titled "A Reflection by a Gentleman of Kentucky." And it talked about this whole ordeal. And there's only 3 people who knew about this. You can narrow it down if you want to read into it. This is Charles Scott. This is what was written about him. Mm-hmm. Scott was a brave, straightforward soldier, ever round, reliable, brave, and truthful. His literacy accomplishments were utterly unequal to the production of such a paper.
Oh, Lord.
So he could not, I guess they're basically saying he was so bad at writing, he could not have possibly written that paper.
No.
So it was either George Muter or Thomas Marshall. Most likely, I think it was George Muter, because he is the one that is also...
It sounds like Kentucky. I can print the paper, but I can't read or write. Well, let's go, boys. We'll have our first newspaper.
So I'll be the governor.
Yeah.
I can't write with a darn, but I'll be your governor. But another interesting quote is, as the balance inclines the beam, the Atlantic states of America must sink as the western settlements rise. And that was kind of a way. I guess with Kentucky, you could see that being like Kentucky was being populated, had a lot of good resources and so forth. And the other, they've been fighting a revolution. It's understandable that they were they had a lot to go on with,
But they said Kentucky has to sink?
No, the Atlantic states of America must sink as the western settlements rise.
Huh.
That was one of the little quotes I got from the old book there.
Huh.
Yeah. There's some. As far as making, I guess, the country, if you want to go with it that way.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know. I did not know until I started reading this book that there was so much foreign influence in Kentucky, as far as it even becoming a state, which made it all more relevant that it needs. The U.S. I guess that pushes Virginia's hand and the rest of the 13 colonies, as in, hey, maybe we should do this. So George Muter, though, or Judge Muter, which is George Muter, writes in the Kentucky Gazette. That immediately framing a constitution and asking admission to the Union was full of danger and illegality, and even smacked of high treason against the Commonwealth of Virginia. So I got it that George Muter here, he kind of knows about all these foreign influences, and he turns around and says, writes this big article saying, hey, we don't need to become a state. I don't know if that's saying he was pushing for the foreign influences or saying we need to stick with the U.S. or the 13 colonies before before the stuff gets out of hand. But this article,
it was already out of hand.
This article sways a bunch of people.
Oh yeah,
and everybody's like, whoa, maybe we shouldn't be doing this. And everybody kind of just stops and is like, okay, we support the colonies. We're Virginians.
Yeah,
we want to stick with this. And so it just pushes things back. A new delegation is sent each time.
You're talking about my kin.
Yeah, whoa, them fighting words, you're wrong.
Yeah. We'd rather fight than switch.
So John Brown, though, he writes to Thomas Jefferson and Madison, and they, in turn, want to. Hey, no, they're big influencers to push for Kentucky becoming a state. They're like, hey, you name some counties after us. You ought to be a state. But it wasn't given a hearing again, and it's just, it's just one of those things. It's like that. Which again, they had their own issues going on.
Yeah.
Their own issues,
supporting rebellions.
But given by Marshall to the legislature of Virginia, the representatives of the good people of the inhabitants of several counties composing the District of Kentucky, and convention begged leave again to address you on the great and important subject, their separation from the parent state and being made a member of the federal union. Again, they're sending somebody to plead their case again and again, but it's why I say it's a divorce. They get there, they're pleading their case, and Virginia adjourn their session.
Summer break.
Yep, guys. You know what? We're going to take some break here. There's a lot of foreign stuff going on over here in
time to plant
Kentucky.
The
corn. We're gonna hold off.
Plant the pumpkins.
Yeah. So, and again, I get back to Muter. I think he had a big old hand in all this. So Brown, he knew about the Spanish influence. He told George Muter, Samuel McDowell. Marshall knew about Conley's British plan. He told George Muter and Charles Scott. So those were technically the people who knew about all this. And the only person who's consistent is George Muter. So he would be the person that I'd guess would be the most,
Have you ever been to Conley's Bottom?
I have not, no.
Over near Campbellsville and Green River.
Mm-mm. Is it pretty cool?
It's real cool.
Really?
It's flooded, but it's cool.
It's named after Conley?
Yeah.
Cool.
It's good fishing.
Marshall, though, he writes to George Washington and to clear up the whole mess. And the convention meets again and in 1790, and Virginia says it's treason. Says, listen, y'all, becoming a new state is going to be treason. All that.
Didn't bother Kentucky.
Okay.
What else?
What else is new?
It's another charge against us. Drunken in public, treason. What the heck? Who cares? Who's counting?
It's so funny because this happens and
treason. Well, that's fighting words.
Well, the convention says, hey, we'll meet back in January 1st, 1790. Virginia says it's treason. Kentucky says, okay, you know what we're going to do? We're going to meet again, and we're going to make a constitution.
We're in the meetings, especially when they're passing out bourbon whiskey.
Yeah. And they pass, and this is, you get political. They pass the Act of Separation at this convention in December 1789, saying, hey, we're separating from Virginia. So even though Virginia says, "Hey, this is treason," they say, "Well, you know what? We're going to do it anyway."
Who's Virginia?
Yeah. So
who do they think they are?
And so the separation, though, was forthcoming, and Kentucky was going to be admitted into the Union on June 1st, 1792. That's kind of what comes of it. I guess the other 13 colonies, they ratify everything. Say, yeah, you're good. Come on in, boys. You can. We'll take the bluegrass.
We were the 15th state, weren't we?
15th, yeah. But of course, a lot of concerns was the
expecting police.
I don't know.
You're looking over your shoulder. I did too. We both jumped with our hands up.
But a new the state concerns, of course, is Mississippi.
This is an underground production.
The Mississippi was a big thing. Natives to the north. Slavery was a tough topic, and for the longest time, Virginia handled it, and it was really close to not having slavery. Kentucky was really close.
Really?
Yes.
I hadn't heard that before.
David Rice of Lincoln fought for emancipation, and the Baptist Church split. All this stuff.
Right.
I mean, those are side things. But he fought for emancipation, but everything came down when they were drafting up. Everybody agreed on everything except slavery, and the public feeling kind of run out. This guy named George Nicholas. He came from Virginia and helped draft the Kentucky Constitution. And in the Constitution was his production, was kind of his, he kind of wrote it, I guess. But he pushed slavery through, what is the 9th Article. And they had not they could not pass laws for emancipation, but they could pass laws that made slave owners treat their slaves humanely. That was that was the thing. And Mr. Taylor of Mercer County made a motion, and Mr. Smith of Bourbon County seconded the motion to expunge Article 9. So if that would have passed, that would have got rid of slavery in Kentucky. However, it was 16 nays, and these are just some notable nays I'll throw out there. Samuel Taylor, Harry Enos, John Bailey, Charles Kavanaugh, James Garrett, future governor, and John McKinney. Of course, there's more than that. There's 16 total. Now, the nays I'll throw out there, too. There's 26 nays. Samuel McDowell, Benjamin Logan, Isaac Shelby, Thomas Clay, Caleb Wallace, John Edwards, Benjamin Harrison, and Robert Rankin. Those were the people that voted nay. And notice, Benjamin Logan was the big founder of Stanford and so forth. Isaac Shelby was a governor who owned slaves.
How many yays were there?
16 yays, 26 nays.
Okay.
To expunge it, so it didn't pass.
Right.
So it stayed. Pretty interesting. And I wonder about Robert Rankin and his connection to the abolitionists. John Rankin. I don't know. I don't know if there's any connection there, but that's interesting. If there was, I don't know for sure if that Thomas Clay is the Clays that we know about. Henry and the rest of them.
Probably.
I would assume so. But pretty interesting. Pretty interesting. I didn't know about any of that till then, and who knows? Maybe the person that wrote that book was nuts and they made it all up. But
Clays had slaves, but Henry did.
Yeah. So that's it, man. That's it. That's how it became a state.
Isn't that interesting?
It is. Yeah. I didn't know about the foreign influence like I did. I did not know about. I didn't know about the slavery issue either. That it was that close to being.
I didn't either.
Expunged. Which would have been very interesting. That would have been very interesting if you thought that the 15th state, expunged slavery and the rest of them had it.
Right.
Especially in 1792. Yeah. But that's a whole nother topic. We could talk hours about that.
And a lot of those families were from central Kentucky too, pretty much.
Oh yeah, yeah. When you look at these
those are the big slave areas of our state, so it's odd. Which like Garrett, Garrett came from Virginia, but he was his family had kind of they weren't poor, but they'd kind of lost their wealth, so that's why he came to Virginia or to Kentucky, so he could claim land. Yeah,
and then and become